Hello, friends. Welcome to the Christ and Coffee podcast. And today we're going to be talking about attachment theory. Jeremy Tovmassian, who's a co-host of this program, has made a career shift to being a pastor, to being a therapist. And one of the ways he helps people is through a system called attachment theory. So today we're going to shift gears and talk about what is attachment theory.
Yeah, it's very wonky in terms of language, but just a very kind of quick rundown definition of it. It's basically a concept that came from a theorist in Britain. He was a psychiatrist and he was a clinician, a therapist. His name was John Bowlby, and it was towards the early middle of the 20th century. And he started to do research and develop this theory that the way that we're attached to or cared for by our earliest caregivers, whatever they might be, in some communities it's your grandparents, and some it's your parents, whoever your primary caregiving attachment was, your relationship with that primary caregiver early on in childhood will shape your perspective, your worldview, in such a way that you have certain ideas about yourself and certain ideas about your ability to trust other people. And that kind of ripples out to impact you over the course of your life. So the basic idea is, how you're cared for and loved as a child impacts the way that you love yourself and others into the future. So that's
like if that wasn't there, it causes negative repercussions. If it was there, it causes positive security. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of like my dad would always say some sort of like sayings like the pomegranate doesn't fall far from the tree or something to that. Yeah. Or this is a good one. He always says, I don't even know if these are like from the old country or if he just makes them up.
Right.
And another one he says is, I mean, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, just uses pomegranate. But this one is interesting. He says, don't trust someone who can't trust their mother. This is all like attachment theory themes.
Yeah, very, very much so. And there's sort of a connected movement attached to attachment theory. It's called objects relations theory. And so object relations, in psychological language, objects are caregivers or people, right? So how you relate to an object, how you relate to the other person, and so the idea of how you've related to your parents, how you've related to your siblings will then create patterns of how you relate to others out in perpetuity in your relationships. So it used to be very early on in the research that the primary focus of the research was on mother-child relationships. So the nurturing of, the early infant relationship with the mother and how that impacts them. But now they've expanded it to look at, just parental caregiving roles in general, and even into adulthood, romantic and intimate relationships and how that impacts your abilities. So if you were cheated on as, a high school student, let's say, how does that impact how you view future relationships? And, how does that sort of impact your ability to trust others and what it says and how you kind of speak to yourself, the self-talk that you have inside of you. So that's, the general idea, and it's kind of intuitive. It sounds almost kind of like a duh.
Yeah. Right? Everyone has a parent, right? Everyone has this relationship dynamic. And it's interesting. It's like every great work of art kind of brings out the parental child dynamic, like good storytelling. I mean, as Christians, we like at the center of the faith is this God is a father and we're his children. So it's like definitely there in the DNA generation after generation. It's just like the most human thing imaginable, these attachments to the people who gave us life or raised us or both.
Right.
And but this like fleshes it out to a great degree of clarity, and it helps kind of like pinpoint patterns and why people may behave the way they do, right? It's like and that's why it's so popular, because it finds like, okay, if you're able to like understand what kind of upbringing you had, it'll help you relate now to the give you an understanding of who you are and how you relate to other people.
Right. Like, so yeah, like it's very intuitive. And it's very, I mean, and like you said, it's biblical, right? I mean, it's a concept in scripture. I mean, the basic idea of attachment theory is how you're loved will shape who you become. And, that's at the core of the biblical witness, is this language around, God's infinite, gracious love, like he's sharing love with you. And that's supposed to form us and shape us in ways that make us loving of our, of ourself in good ways, and loving of others, right?
Yep.
But what's interesting is that even though it sounds good and sounds, intuitive, attachment theory, like, actually put it to paper. Bowlby kind of researched it and explored it, and, totally removed from our faith tradition, or totally removed from any, like, intuitive convictions. He found that, yeah, this is how human beings function. It's interesting that it's not even just mental wealth, that's not what I meant to say, mental health, that's shaped by early attachment. It's actually relational health that's shaped by that early attachment, and also, very interestingly, physical health. There's a lot of research. I don't want to get too much into the weeds, but there's been research that says that disruptions in early childhood attachment have negative physical repercussions for children as they develop. They have slower developmental growth. They hit the marks at different times, but also just physically, they're more prone to certain things in the future, like poor heart health and cholesterol issues and all that kind of stuff. Wow. So it's documented. It's just it's very interesting to see how at a very early age, how you are loved or how you are not loved impacts your future. And it's not like, it's not like your fate is sealed at that point, like, I don't want to make it like, if you're loved this way in childhood, in the future, you'll never be able to break the habit. It's just, being aware of it in the future will help you to be more intentional about how it's impacting you in your relationships, and in your own relationship with yourself and your self-talk.
I mean, that's what that's like what you primarily do when you counsel people using attachment theory. It's like you want them to revisit the past so you could break the patterns, or first of all, be self-aware first. Cause I think everyone is like oblivious to this. I think, I don't know. I don't care how smart you are, how self-aware, how big your EQ is, whatever. Like, I think it's one of the biggest blind sides, is like, but it's also one of the most obvious things about us. It's like, we analyze the foundational relationships we have when we enter into this world, and what's good about it, what's bad about it. And I think the other thing too, whenever like I counsel people, again, I'm not a therapist or do attachment theory, but it's like, I find that people have a difficulty to speak negative about their family or their parents, because it's like their source of love. And but it's not like you're going after these things to attack your parents. You're trying to like understand them and trying to break whatever bad things they've passed down to you, because they probably got it from their parents and vice versa, and they're got it from their parents. So you're trying to break generational structures that it may be negative.
Right. And it's, that's one of the misconceptions of therapy. A lot of times it's like, oh, we're going to go into therapy and just,
talk about daddy
issues.
Talk
trash about my parents and how they did. And, a good therapist will have empathy and help you understand to some degree how they did the best they could. And like, I don't know, my daughter's obsessed with Encanto right now. I don't know if you've seen it yet, but, but really the resolution of the whole movie, well, I don't know, disclaimer, this is a spoiler alert if you haven't seen it.
Fast forward 10 seconds from now if you want to.
Yeah, exactly. If you're the one person in the world like Haig who hasn't seen Encanto yet.
No, my son's only 1.5. We don't watch Encanto yet. We just watch YouTube videos every now and then.
Yeah. But the resolution is, realizing that the matriarch, the grandmother of the family, went through intense trauma. And the reason she treats people like she does and has parented her children and her grandchildren the way that she has is because she's experienced such trauma. And having empathy for that creates space for the family to do something different. So, yeah. So again, it's not about blaming your parents, but it's about creating curiosity around how you yourself have been shaped by these experiences in childhood, and how that helps you understand some of the patterns in your own self-talk and relationship with others that develops.
Right. So from my understanding, there's like 4 main categories of like, there's like 4 kind of attachment of the theory, right? Is that correct?
Right. So yeah, so there's like there's the theory, the basic idea, how you're loved will impact how you, grow into relationships with yourself and others. And then based on the kind of love that you received, you develop a certain attachment style, right? And so the attachment styles, different people will call them different things, but typically you'll see the language of a secure attachment, which means you were securely attached to a caregiver early on. It's kind of like the ideal, the one that you're looking for. And for the most part, most people are securely attached to their parents. Maybe there's examples in the past of little hiccups and things like that, but it was good enough. That's actually the language, by the way.
Oh, good enough. Good enough.
Good enough. Yeah, the clinical language is good enough.
I'm glad they're not like demanding perfection. That's good.
Yeah, good enough parenting.
As a parent, that's really reassuring.
Yeah, huge. And that's what I want to also just kind of instill on people. For the most part, you've had good enough parents, and the good enough parenting creates a secure attachment. You feel safe, you feel nurtured, you feel loved. There may be hiccups along the road, but generally, you've been taken care of, and so that creates a secure attachment, and that's the ideal. The other three are kind of what happens if there are chronic, ongoing breaks in attachment throughout the relationship between the caregiver and the child. So there's one called anxious preoccupied, there's dismissive avoidant, and there's fearful avoidant.
So okay, you just threw a bunch of words that are confusing me. Can we like pretend like I'm a 5-year-old and explain that, like, each one of those three, like break it down?
Right.
And so examples. Yeah.
Let me start like this. First, it's very rare that you'll find fearful avoidant.
Okay.
So fearful avoidant is like the dramatic difference from secure attachment. So fearful avoidant would probably be somebody who experienced severe trauma at the hands of a caregiver.
Like we're talking abuse, we're talking
sexual abuse, physical abuse, like maybe even something as extreme as like experiencing the caregiver like giving them away to somebody else, or you maybe an emotional and verbal abuse, maybe. But fearful avoidant is like the extreme of the other end. And I think, there's stuff that says something like 4 to 5% of the population experiences this. So it's a slim amount compared to the others.
Do we know how much is in the good enough category? Is there a percentage for that, or?
I haven't done that. I'll check in on that and get you that.
Okay.
But yeah. But I would say a majority are securely attached. Fearful avoidant is like the opposite end of the spectrum from secure attachment. It's funny, the way I have the screen, I'm moving my hands, but you can't see my hands on the screen. So forget that.
Okay, so there's a really good one that's secure attachment, and then the really bad one, which is like those extreme cases,
is fearful avoidant.
Fearful avoidant, and then these other two are kind of more of the like good, but maybe not good enough, or a mixture.
Right. So one way that's helpful for me to frame it is, I watch a lot of movies. Maybe it's not helpful for others, but one character that comes to mind when I think of a fearful avoidant attachment style is Will from Good Will Hunting. Okay. So if you've seen Good Will Hunting, he's very disorganized. He's very confusing. On one level, he's very self-confident and almost like arrogant. On the other hand, he's like terrified and becomes really anxious when he's pressed to develop a relationship with the love interest in the movie. So it's this very confusing, disorganized behavior between avoiding others and then anxiously desiring others. So people who are fearful avoidant tend to be really, really confusing partners. They're very overwhelming to be in a relationship with because you don't know what they really want, and that's because of this early childhood caregiver relationship where they probably were, let's say for example they were abused as a child, and so they learned that the person they want attention from actually hurts them. So they really do want the attention, they want the attachment, they crave that love. They realize they're not good enough for it because of what the caregiver did. So they're very conflicted. I want it. If I get it, is it good enough? I don't know. Like, I'm very confused. And so that sort of disorganization and lack of safety creates a severely fearful avoidant.
So let's just like talk about that. So I know there's like probably no clean recipe and a lot of work, and this is where it gets really detailed, because like your job is, if you have a client with that sort of upbringing, there's hope. That's the whole point of what you're doing. You're trying to create a secure attachment. What are some like big picture like ways you could help? I mean, I think it's always dangerous for lay people to just put on the therapist hat and get to work, but like what needs to happen like in those situations?
It's very hard. So again, like I said, this is a very small subset of the population. But experiencing someone like this, there'd have to be a lot of empathy and understanding that the chaos is reflective of the chaos in them. And so having a sense of empathy towards the situation and being able to have sort of like a long-standing patience with them. Another thing, interestingly, is setting down firm boundaries. So these individuals were never parented; they were never, reared as children. Like they never had boundaries, anything like that. So having a clear set of boundaries for these individuals in a way that you're sort of protected, because they can be very difficult to manage.
Yeah.
But also in a way that they see that that's how love works. There are certain boundaries that exist between the two. Also, a lot of this work, attachment work, is the therapist becoming the parent in the relationship. So modeling parenting, in fact, a lot of times it's like you're talking to a child in the clinical relationship, so that you're teaching them what secure attachment looks like. So modeling and scaffolding for them what attachment looks like. You kind of put on a parent role and do that work with them so that they can develop their own self-regulation. Part of it is they don't know how to regulate those emotional outbursts. They don't know how to regulate those feelings of mistrust and not being safe.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things, a therapist will do is help them learn how to listen to their body and regulate when things are getting out of control. Because again, they early on in childhood, they never learn how to do that. I mean, you think about, you're going through sleep training, or you might have gone through sleep training at some point, and you were teaching your child how to self-regulate. Like, I'm scared, I'm alone. And you're very early on teaching them, hey, like Baba's in the other room while you're crying, but you can do this. So I'll come in to check in on you. You're good. I love you. You can take this. And then you walk away, and you're teaching them how to regulate themselves in a way that they're cared for, they're attached to you, but they know that they have some agency, right? Fearful avoidant people don't have that because they've been robbed of it in childhood. And so you're teaching them how to do that in a lot of ways, from like, sometimes at an adult life phase, right? So it's very interesting. So if you look at that far end of the spectrum, those two in the middle are kind of parts of the fearful avoidant. So you've got dismissing avoidant and anxious preoccupied. So the combination of those two become fearful avoidant. So you'll see aspects of both of those in a fearful avoidant individual. But dismissing avoidant and preoccupied, anxious preoccupied, are two other attachment styles.
So let's just break it down. So there's the secure attachment, good enough. There's the extreme ones, that's called fearful avoidance.
Mm-hmm.
And then let's just break down each of these two a bit more, because I feel like, do most people statistically fall into one of these like categories for most people, or they have elements of the not so perfect, like
right. And you can be curious about how that affected you, right? So even if you had good enough parenting, you can look at how maybe I have some anxious preoccupied tendencies.
Got it.
Or dismissing avoidant. So fearful avoidant.
So what are the two called? Because these big words and especially because they put two labels on one thing confuse me a little bit. So let's just tackle one of them.
So anxious preoccupied.
Okay.
Would be an example of somebody, let's say, like, I'll give an example, like early on in childhood, you experience neglect, the caregiver's not showing you any attention. So in order to get attention from the caregiver, you anxiously do something to get the attention of the behavior of the parent or the caregiver. So, chronic detachment from the parent, and then the child acting out by bullying somebody at school, beating somebody up, and then coming home, and the parent finally, paying attention, saying, hey, cut it out, stop it, don't be doing this kind of thing. That cements a pattern that if I do these things, I can earn some sort of attachment bond with the parent. And so there's this perpetuating pattern of, okay, when I become detached from the parent, I'm going to anxiously do something in order to get the attention of the caregiver and receive some sort of attachment.
So this is like classic, like, or I'm a troublemaker because I don't have love at the home because I need attention.
It could be, yeah, or it could also be classic codependent person, who finds it that when they're helpful, okay, they're cared for. When they're not helpful, they're not cared for. So anxiously, I'm going to do helpful things in order to become or to earn a sort of attachment with the caregiver. So,
you got a movie illustration for this one?
I do actually. It's another Disney one. So if you've ever watched Frozen, Anna is a classic anxious, preoccupied individual. These people will often crave nurture, crave connection. And so what they'll do is they'll create we'll call it like a fantasy bond. So they'll create this perfect image of an individual. They'll overlook all of the like terrible things in them. But the fact that they actually want to connect with them and want to, partner with them makes it all the better. Like, so very, what's the word? Rose-colored glasses, right? If someone shows them attention, if someone shows them care, they'll very quickly attach to that individual. And so anxious, preoccupied people will kind of run both of those, both of those gamuts. Like either they'll do very loud things to get people's attention to care for them, or they will become really, really helpful and sort of look at others with rose-colored glasses in order to just get some sort of attachment and care and love from the individual.
Yeah, this is like so can this person be like, my parents were awful, I'm never going to be like my parents, I'm going to prove to the world, look at me?
Yes. Yeah, that could be one way.
And this, or this could be like, my parents had to work, both parents had to work, and it's not like they didn't love me, just they had to support me, and the way they showed love was they had to work and they weren't quite there, not that they didn't love me, right? Like that's the thing with all these things, it's not like cookie cutter examples. These are just big umbrellas for many different types of scenarios, right? Okay.
So like, again, back to, again, it's helpful for like us to attach it to movie characters. So, Anna in Frozen.
Is Anna the one who sings Let It Go, or the sister of?
The sister.
Okay. I watched Frozen, but I fell asleep during it.
Full disclosure, it was just on TV because my daughter's homesick and she was watching it. So I was like, oh, this is good for the podcast.
Okay, good.
So Anna she lost her parents and she was neglected by Elsa, her sister, and so she craves attention, and the first person that gives her the attention is this evil Prince Hans, but she doesn't know it. She creates this fantasy bond with him, clings to him, and then at the end it turns out that he's a jerk and yada yada yada.
So this is also like another example in this category would be like, all right, one of the kids gets more attention or has more favoritism than the other, and the other kid who doesn't have favoritism, whether it's for positive or negative reasons, is seeking more love and is acting out either in a way of causing trouble or look at me, look how great I am.
Right. And it could even be something as benign as like a parent dealing with a kid who's chronically sick.
Yeah.
Right? And the sibling is like, hey, I want attention. When I do this, I get attention. And then they learn the pattern. In adulthood, that's how they get attention, is by doing something or anxiously seeking some sort of attention through a certain behavior.
And then it's always tough because they feel guilty because they could understand where their parents are coming from, but still they needed that love.
Right.
In that kind of scenario.
Right. Yeah. So that's anxious, preoccupied. And
so then, before we jump into the fourth one, what are some like therapy tactics used for that demographic?
Right. So again, a lot of this is going to be similar. So it's going to be like re-engaging them as a secure parent, as a secure attachment figure. So teaching them boundaries again, teaching them how to self-regulate, teaching them how to see the pattern playing out. So some of this is creating insight where they see, okay, when this happens, I do this, right? Or when my partner shows me affection, I feel really safe. when he goes off on a business trip, I feel really uncomfortable. Where's that coming from? So creating curiosity around that kind of thing helps them develop insight. And then, have some routine reminders, either through therapy or through, the relationship they have where they feel anxious, preoccupied. Most of this work, if you're dealing with a relationship, you want to have the partner there so that they can understand why the person does these kinds of things. And then you're cementing a support system where they can say, the example of the partner going off on a business trip, hey, I'm here now, I love you, whatever, checking in on them regularly to make sure that they're not creating these anxious attachment bonds, but also slowly weaning them off it so that that kind of thing doesn't have to happen. And they can self-regulate, right? They can tell themselves like, hey, this is just part of what I've learned. Let me back off. He's on a business trip. She's on a business trip. I'm going to be fine. Right.
Yeah. So, but like that example, for example, you were mentioning like, all right, like my middle school girlfriend cheated on me. It doesn't just have to be coming from the parent. Like that lack of trust could be coming from friends, from other relationships too. So it's not always parent, it's any type of attachment, but the primary one is attachment to the, the caregivers.
And this is kind of why, this is kind of why this is a gradient, right? It's not just like one thing or the other. Like you can be securely attached and have dismissive, avoidant, or anxious, preoccupied styles. So, and it could be because you had really great parenting, but you had really terrible romantic relationships in high school or something. And that, that messes with your view of, attachment and love.
Yeah. So great. So let me just recap for myself. So you have the good enough category. What's that called?
Secure attachment.
Secure attachment. Yeah. Fearful avoidant is like those extreme cases, but they happen. Like, and then there's this anxious, preoccupied. And that's the one that.
And you can think about it like this: anxious, preoccupied. You're anxious and you're preoccupied because you're craving some sort of attachment to the caregiver. Okay. So those two go together in a way where I'm overwhelming myself with thoughts of creating some sort of attachment bond by doing something, or being lovable.
Okay. And then the fourth one is what?
That's called dismissive avoidance. And so this is where, if there's detachment from the parent, at a certain point, the child says, screw you. I don't need your love. I don't need your care. I'm going to back off and just totally avoid any sort of connection with you. They become emotionally distant, isolated, withdrawn. You might think of, okay, so this is I'm shifting gears here to a Marvel movie. This is like the classic Tony Stark. So, Stark is totally conflicted about his relationship with his dad. He was the primary caregiver. He lost them at an age where he was kind of being a rebel. But he always felt, not good enough, and like he wasn't matching up to what his dad's expectations were. And so, he went a different route. Instead of becoming anxious and preoccupied with thoughts of connecting with his dad, he eventually said, screw you, I'm going to do my own thing. And he becomes, emotionally distant. He's isolated. Even though he's very social, he's above everybody else, right? And he doesn't become vulnerable. There's not a lot of vulnerability with this type of.
He puts on a suit of armor that blocks from
quite literally. Yes,
okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And that is a very classic dismissive avoidant move. And it's a safety mechanism, right? It's I'm not going to show vulnerability. I'm going to stonewall, because if I do show vulnerability, I still might not get attachment. So rather than dare to get like to that point, I'm just going to retreat and be dismissive. I'm going to retreat and avoid any connection with the caregiver.
So just to clarify, so there is a lot of parallels to the last two we're covering. So again, it's the anxious, preoccupied, and then the
dismissive avoidant.
So they receive not good enough love foundationally, and then the way they react is different,
right?
So it's not necessarily like there's two persona types. Like you could have, like, okay, you have a family, you have a couple of siblings, same type of not good enough love coming from both parents or one parent, but then the way the two children react to that not good enough love is one could be more anxious, one could be more piecing out.
Right. Exactly.
Okay, that's good. I'm learning a lot. This is great.
Yeah. So a dismissive avoidant child would become withdrawn and isolate, and an anxious preoccupied would constantly, anxiously try to find ways to re-engage the parent, right? And it could become a point where the anxious preoccupied tries so much that eventually they give up, and that becomes a dismissive avoidant. But again, it's on a spectrum. It's a sort of gradient. So it's not like you're stuck in one or the other of these. It's just kind of a helpful construct to understand how that early relationship impacted your future relationships. It's also pretty, I mean, the words are there, like anxious preoccupied. You can understand why an individual might have anxiety in their self later on in the future. Like you can understand why they might be codependent. You can understand why they might be people pleasers, why they might want people's attention. You understand that. Dismissive avoidant, you could understand why they might have whatever hoarding tendencies, narcissism, whatever that might be. Like it makes sense of future disorders or future issues that could develop later on in life. So that's why this is such a helpful construct.
Yeah, absolutely. So what are ways, is it similar things to the other one? What are some unique things for counseling or helping people with the ones who are checked out? I'm gonna be like, all right, there's the good one, there's the bad, really bad one, there's the anxious one, and then there's the checked out one.
That's a great way to look at it. And okay. A great way to look at the really bad one is it's a combination of the two in the middle.
Yeah.
So the fearful avoidant is a combination of anxious preoccupied and dismissive avoidant. So at some points they're seeking attention by doing really crazy things, and at other points they're saying, I don't want any connection, get away from me, like I don't need you at all, right? Again, it's that Goodwill Hunting character who has moments of I really want attention and care, that's why he goes into this relationship. And then there's moments of isolation where he says, I'm better than all of you, I'm not going to let myself be vulnerable. And it resolves in the end with him being able to set those aside and dare to have a relationship with this woman on the other coast. So in terms of things you do in therapy for a dismissive avoidant, you really you model vulnerability, you model empathy. A lot of this is, again, it sounds kind of redundant, but you're parenting, you're reparenting an adult, basically. So you're modeling communication. A lot of these individuals will be stonewalled. So in a relationship, they'll be backed off and stonewalled in a way where they won't say anything to the wife, and they'll just harbor resentment, or they'll just harbor anger. So getting them to learn how to actually express needs, which is not something they ever did. They were self-cared for, they just kind of isolated and were okay with not being. So having them be able to communicate needs, teaching them and modeling how to voice a thought, voice an opinion, say something that is vulnerable, and then have it caught either by the therapist or ideally by the partner. If they're in there for couples therapy, you want the partner to catch the vulnerability and return it with authenticity and vulnerability. So you're teaching them that, okay, this is how you were taught in childhood. Here's another alternative. Here's another person, and they break the pattern. They break the narrative for you. So cementing a new narrative for them is really helpful. Also, just kind of deconstructing the old narrative as well. So, okay, your parents did this, and this. That's part of the empathy piece. They did that. Maybe they did the best they could. Maybe they tried this and that didn't work. Maybe, how about this? How about that? And kind of slowly kind of chipping away at the narrative so that you open them up to the curiosity and the possibility that that's not the only way they have to live life. They can live life differently. And that's one of the things I use often. I do a lot of what we call narrative therapy.
Yeah,
and
great.
So I'll chip away at some of the certainty of the narrative that the people are living into. I'll chip away at it a little bit until they're at a place where they're open to receiving a different angle and saying, well, what about we try this, and how did it work here, and what's and so little by little the possibility and curiosity for a different way forward takes place.
So just, of course, this is a generalization, but correct me if I'm completely wrong, but the anxious type seems to be like someone who is like can't control their emotions or going all over the place. And then the checked out one is someone who can't be in touch with their emotion because they just close the door. Kind of.
Generally, yes. The anxious, preoccupied might also hide their emotions in order to be helpful.
Got it. Because they're seeking the
because they're seeking attention and they're people pleasing. But they really, really crave emotional connection. It's a dichotomy, like a contradiction. Like, I really want to be connected to this person emotionally, but I have to hide my emotions in order for them to love me. So I'm going to live this really uncomfortable space where I want and don't get, but I still get connection.
Yeah, I think this is important. Everyone is built relationally. Everyone has emotions. 100%. Everyone has an upbringing. So it's like no one gets away from this system, because it's like I oftentimes when I'm dealing with my tech friends, they tend to be like, I'm out of touch with my emotion or this and that. I'm like, no, you have emotions. You may not be able to be in tune with them. And you can't give me your personality type or your career as an excuse. I see your emotions manifesting in a different way. Like, I see that all the time. Or like people use their like, oh, I'm feeling this way, especially in our millennial Gen Z culture. It's like, oh, like it's super feely right now, where it's like having a disorder is like a positive thing, or like having a victim card thing angle is a good thing, so you could get attention. But it's like all this is like making sure you understand where you're coming from, securing a narrative, understanding how to be in tune with your emotions, not being emotional, but in tune with what your body's communicating, which is a great thing. And you're right. And how to relate now that you have the security to others. And
100%. I couldn't agree more. Like, when you talk about emotions, have been bad mouthed, right? Like, especially sometimes by Christian communities, which is kind of ironic, but
or like Armenian circles or
cultural, yeah, exactly, immigrant communities. They don't have, they'll say, we don't have time for emotions, we don't have time to feel something.
Yeah, we have to get to work, we need to feed you.
Right. which is
great, thanks, Dad.
Yeah. Which is a symptom of another problem, which we could get into some other time. But what's, when you break down the research on what emotions are at this point, there's a lot of language around emotions being a signal. It's your body's signal of something going on internally and externally.
It's a data point. It's a
data point. What is this telling me, right? I'm angry at this person. I really want to just chop their head off right now.
Yeah.
Okay, where's that coming from? That your body is telling you something, and it's a security system. Your alarm is going off when anger is being triggered. That means that there's some sort of thing inside of you that's triggering, and to suppress that is to shut your body off, right? Yeah. And to become detached from what is, what's happening. So it's not super helpful. It's like ignoring information, right? Which is ironic that tech people would would ignore information and then all about data. But what is this data telling me about this moment right here that's happening? Yeah.
This is all good stuff. I'm sure we'll talk more about some of these systems in the future, but this is a great introduction. I learned a lot. I hope those listening have learned a lot. And I think what we want to do as we're going to talk about more mental health therapy episodes down the line is we just want to destroy any stigmas connected to this stuff. I think that's a huge part of that. And just to acknowledge that we're all relational, emotional creatures. That's part of being human. And also part of that is we all have families or lack of families, and that's going to have repercussions. And everyone knows these things intuitively. It's just, let's talk about it, or be self-aware about it. And then once we're self-aware, okay, what actions do I need to take to get healthy on all levels?
Right. It strikes me just for a moment before we wrap up that we gave examples of all of the 3 bad ones, but we didn't give an example of a secure attachment.
Yeah.
So let me quickly just give you a secure attachment.
That's good. Let's end on a positive note. Yes.
On a positive note and on a recognition that it doesn't mean that you're perfect.
Yes.
So I'll give 2 examples as a mix from the other movies that I just shared. So one would be the therapist in Good Will Hunting, Sean.
That's Robin Williams' character?
Yeah, I was going to say Robert De Niro. Yeah, Robin Williams' character. He's flawed. He's not perfect. He has a lot of pain.
It's not your fault. It's not your fault. I remember that bench scene.
Right. Okay. And he throughout is this, he makes a mistake early on in the therapy. He actually threatens Will at one point because he gets to him. And then he like checks himself, he self-corrects, and he begins again in a different way. He's able to sit in complete silence for a long time until Will comes out and says something. He's able to recognize, hey, Will's problems aren't my problems. I'm going to sit with him here and I'm going to parent him like a parent, you know? So he's a secure attachment example. And another one, Captain America. Captain America is a secure attachment.
For the Avengers?
For the Avengers, he keeps everybody together, but he also keeps himself. He's flawed as a human being, but he also is still there as a caregiver for the team. He supports them.
Okay, it's good leadership. So that there's an importance for leadership here, to have secure, because like the biggest danger for organizations is having insecure leaders lead organizations, and then their fears and phobias will trickle down.
That's a huge
and
point.
I've seen that destroy churches and organizations. If the leader is not secure and could own that parental figure role in a secure sense,
absolutely,
then it'll succeed. But what about like just the typical parent? What are some good parenting? Because I feel like what was it, there's very few examples of like just good homey family structures these days, because like people want the drama. Is there like, can you think of like a good father figure, like
in a TV show?
In a TV show, like, I mean, Bob Saget died. Was he a good in Full House? Carl Winslow, like the 90s shows.
Actually, Carl Winslow, he seems like a solid attachment figure. Maybe Uncle Phil from Fresh Prince. He might be a good figure. Oh, yeah. Actually, that's a perfect one. I'm so glad that you got me to think about Uncle Phil. There's a moment, I still cry when I see this episode. There's a moment when Will's dad comes back. I don't know if you've seen that episode.
I remember now. Yeah.
There's a moment at the end of the episode where the dad turns again. The dad like abandons Will, and Phil just does an amazing job of being this secure, I'm going to catch you in this moment. And Will, like, he just goes into this angry rage, like, and then at the end, he just says, how come he doesn't want me, man? Like, how come he doesn't want me? And Phil just gives him this big hug, and he just starts to bawl in this like mess of tears, right? That is secure attachment. We call that, it's like the live wire in session. If you can connect somebody to the live wire in that moment, that lasts forever. So if you can get that moment, some people call it a breakthrough, whatever, but like that's where the gold is. And so that's, yeah, Uncle Phil, he's a secure attachment figure.
So good. There's another goodwill hunting moment there, but with the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air.
With the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. Which, did you know they have whatever, we're going off topic, but they just made a reboot.
Yeah, but it's going to be all serious. So maybe they're going to revisit these themes of that. But
yeah, but I'm glad that we got to end on a high note here. But to your point, that's exactly, it's huge. People are noticing now that these things are crucial to adopt and to shape in leaders. And so there's a lot of therapists who are working in the field of organizational leadership, character development, coaching, because people have recognized that to have an unhealthy leader, it trickles down into unhealthy leadership, obviously, but also to really unhealthy systems and communities. So I'm really glad you made that point towards the end there. That's huge.
Maybe we could do another episode just on attachment theory and how it affects leadership down the line. That'd be awesome.
Yeah.
All right, Jeremy, thank you for sharing this stuff. And I learned a lot from all of this, and I hope you who are listening learned. And just know, like, this is all biblical themes, right? Love, security, faith, hope, love, trust. These are like the virtues of the faith. So it's just talking about it in a different way, with data points and social sciences to help support some of these beliefs, which I love to have.
Totally.
So thank you, Jeremy. And remember, everyone, stay caffeinating, and we'll see you next week on the Christ and Coffee podcast.